All right. Thanks, you guys, and thanks for joining us today on Intellihelp SALON. I have a friend of mine and an Intellihelp partner on the horn today, which is kind of exciting for us. David Shurna and I belong to an organization of entrepreneurs, and we met a few years ago for the first time through that organization. And that turned into a friendship and now kind of an affiliation with our organizations, which really benefits our audience. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But before we get too deeply into it, let's just start, first of all, by welcoming you, David, and start with our top question, which is, tell us about 3 people, living or dead, that walked the earth that you strongly admire, and why.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure to get to know you and your team as well. I'll start with Mandy Harvey. So Mandy Harvey she was an America's Got Talent finalist who's a jazz singer, and she is completely deaf. And what I admire about Mandy is that she wasn't born deaf. She was studying to be a musician when she was in college, and suddenly had this rapid onset deafness that left her profoundly deaf. And I admire the courage that she had to keep singing and the tenacity she had to figure out a way forward, despite the fact that she couldn't even hear what she was singing, which is amazing. She describes this moment when she went to the finals of America's Got Talent, where the crowd is standing up and cheering. And because there's so much noise that she can't hear, it's actually affecting the vibrations that she normally feels. So just really admire that tenacity and that belief in, hey, I can do this despite what's hit me. And then a second person I admire is someone I work very closely with, who helped me start No Barriers, my nonprofit organization. His name is Eric Weimer. Eric, you may know, is the first blind man to reach the 7 summits, the highest peak on every continent. More recently, he kayaked the full length of the Grand Canyon. And for Eric, most people who, if they admire someone like Eric, it's because, oh my God, he's blind and he climbed the highest peaks. Holy crap, how is that even possible? But for me, it's more, I admire the fact that he didn't let the physical accomplishment of what he achieved be his sole purpose. Instead, he went on to say, I need to give back to the world in a very profound way and teach people to break through the challenges they face. So to me, it's like, there's so many reasons Eric could have just stopped at being the athlete who made it to the 7 summits, but he's like, no, I got to give back to the world. I can't just be that person. And then the final person that I admire is Martin Luther King. And I grew up reading a lot of the stuff that he wrote. And my father was a community organizer on the west side of Chicago. And I just admire the passion for helping people who are in really difficult situations and trying to create a movement to change civilization, really. So I love those qualities in MLK.
So give me one other quality MLK so that you go, he's one of my people.
Yeah, one of the other ones is, I thought, I'm just really impressed with his oratorical abilities, his abilities to take concepts that a lot of people were feeling and put it into words that really motivated and moved folks.
All great qualities. First of all, I have to thank you. Not that it matters necessarily who you pick, but it does to a certain degree, and why you pick them. But you're one of the first people that picked a female as their first person came to mind. And there's tons of admirable women in the world for a variety of reasons, but we've done this exercise a number of times, and mostly with men that we've had on so far, and we have some women slated to have on as well, but that's exciting for me to hear. And the whys, and the whys that you explain are really an insight for the audience to get to know who you are and your value system. And it's so difficult, and you're such a nice and humble person to come onto a broadcast and go, well, this is who I am and this is how I think, in a framework. But this gives us a nice, concise framework to really do get to know you and go, hey, this is who this guy is, through this vehicle of the people that he admires and his character traits. And there's a lot to be admired in that. So now let's go backwards to the beginning, because when they go around kindergarten and they say, what do you want to be? And people say fireman, policeman, paratrooper. Nobody says, I want to start a nonprofit. I've never heard that answer.
That's true. That is true.
How did you get from there to here? What were the steps in between?
Well, as a kid, I wanted to be a wildlife biologist. Actually, more specifically, I really wanted to be a dolphin trainer. I grew up in the city of Chicago, and my dad always took us to the zoo. And I just was like, oh my God, I want to do what those dolphin trainers are doing. So I soon realized that was a pretty narrow thing to desire, and my passions expanded beyond that. But certainly I would say from a foundational standpoint, my mom growing up was a nurse, my dad, a community organizer. So I'm surrounded in my life by two people who are giving their careers and their lives to other people, right? So I saw that model in my parents. And I always knew when I went, on to college and grad school that I wanted to do something that gave back. But it really wasn't until I was in grad school and I took some business courses, both standard business courses as well as a certificate program they had in nonprofit management, that I thought this is going to be a really good way to scale impact. And that's kind of where it kind of came together for me. I had done about 6 years of work before going on to grad school, and I was kind of thinking about what impact do I really want to have, and how might I have it. And it was in that grad school time period that I came to the conclusion that a nonprofit was a good way to do it. There's a funny story about that kind of set me on this track to grad school too, is that my uncle, I didn't know my uncle very well. He was a senior leader at IBM, and I knew his wife and his kids really well. But whenever we went to visit them in Connecticut, my uncle was never around because he was traveling around the world for IBM. But he, about a year before going to grad school, he brought me into his big oak paneled office, massive office. It's like as big as the first floor of my home right now. And he sat me down. He said, David, what are you doing with your life? And I'm thinking, I'm doing a lot of good stuff with my life. I've been educator. I've been teaching kids in the field. And he said, I think you have more potential. I want to send you to grad school. He said, but I have 3 conditions. Condition number 1, I want you to get into one of your top 3 schools in your field. Condition number 2 is that I want you to do really well and get good grades. And then the third condition, and this is the one that kind of aligns to your question, he said, I want you to convince me right now that you either want to help millions of people or make millions of dollars, because that's the only reason to go to the best schools. And I said, well, I don't really care that much about the making the millions, but I want to help millions. And I sort of laid out my plan. And so, there's always this passion for how do you keep scaling your impact and making a difference in the lives of others.
Well, and I always say that's the right kind of passion to have. One of the things that I think is a misnomer, and we had Jack Canfield on a couple of weeks ago, and we're talking to him about this, was this idea of, hey, find your passion and pursue that. Well, you could have a passion for alcohol and pursue that, and it doesn't end well. Like, there's a lot of things you could be passionate about in the world that are generally selfish things or escapism, and they're just not useful. But finding something that's purposeful and then developing a passion for it where other people benefit from your passion, those are the people that change the world. And those are really, in my mind, the difference between, fun passions or really great passions that are useful to mankind. Did you look at it? Did you run this through any filter in your mind as you got into this world of helping other folks, or where did that come from in you? Was that your parents? Was it just a natural instinct of yours?
Yeah, I think that for me, a lot of the work we did early on at No Barriers, this nonprofit that I started, was around youth. We still do a lot of work with schools across the nation, but that came from the years of work I did teaching kids in the field, mostly environmental studies type stuff on short expeditions that I would take kids out on. There was some pretty profound learnings that I saw for kids at the middle and high school level that were happening. And I thought, this is really something that kids need at a young age. And then when I got out of college, I went and lived in Guatemala and then Panama in some very rural communities, pretty much in the middle of nowhere. And that exposure to extreme poverty and all the things that go on with that, but also the way that people live their lives there and had fulfilling lives despite poverty in many ways. It was sort of this combination of seeing the bigger world and what was happening in the bigger world with this true passion I had for helping kids learn that made me feel like there's something in this space that is the magic sauce, both for me personally, that motivates and energizes me, and feels like something that the world needs.
Yeah, for me, the similar thing happened, and I did not enter the world at all with I had to go through all of the terrible steps of being selfish and wanting things for myself exclusively and realizing that's a dead end, and then chasing money, which turned out to be a dead end, and then eventually doing things that really benefited other folks in business, but it was always business related, and getting all of the kind of the perks that went along with that. But finally doing some contracts that were outside of the United States that took me to the Middle East and Turkey and to Central Africa and Egypt and places where I could separate the idea of happiness from finance. Mm-hmm. There's people that are actually blissfully happy, operating functionally fine in the world. They don't have a care in the world about money because that's actually not on their radar. They don't even have a chance to have a care about money. And reframing that for my own mind actually made it simpler for me to get into businesses that were involved helping those people. And it made me want to. It made me less the television toaster salesman and more the Intellihelp guy, where I was like, this is going to be fun to, reinvent the Red Cross or whatever we do here.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So I admire the fact that you kind of showed up in the world that way. And I frankly, I had to
find your way that way. Yeah,
I really did, man. I'm glad there's people like you in the world that 98% of the people I meet are nicer than me. So
well, I would say the majority of people that we work with are more like you too, right? Like they're struggling to find a pathway forward, but they have this hint and glimmer of, hey, this thing that I've been choosing, the way I've been choosing to live isn't the way I aspire to live. I'm not sure how to get there. I'm not even sure. Sometimes they can't quite put their finger on what this thing is. And then they come to us and we help kind of reshape their pathway forward. Mostly they do it through our work, but yeah.
Yeah. And I think that the end of that equation, at least for me, is a far less desire or need of adulation or praise from the outside world, and a far more experiential adulation one-on-one with people. Like you just see somebody be joyful and you know that you had an impact in that, or they're learning. And I love the fact that you're getting kids outside too, and you have an outdoors indoors program and all of the things you do. Well, tell us a little bit more about the integration of your personal life into this work, and then go into No Barriers and really explain to us what this is, what you've come up with, and how it works.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for me, kind of going from that initial story of saying, hey, I want to work with kids and I want to make a difference. And I'd only worked in the real world for 6 years before saying, hey, I'm going to go start something. So I had to figure out the pathway. And for us, it started as mostly as small group trips for kids and retreats for kids that were really.
And who was the original us?
Yeah, great question. So I started it with a colleague of mine that I met in grad school, Julie Dubin, and then this blind man that I mentioned earlier, Eric Weinmeier. Eric and I first met over coffee just a couple of years after he summited Everest nearly 20 years ago, and just shared this idea that, God, wouldn't it be amazing to combine kids with and without disabilities on adventures all over the world? And so it really started as sort of let's send, kids who wouldn't normally have that opportunity on adventures. But what it evolved to is much grander than that now, because now we work with veterans with disabilities. We work with companies going through, challenge with their employees struggling with change and uncertainty. We work with caregivers. There's a lot of folks that have come into the community, tens of thousands of people served per year. And the real focus has become, how do we take the adversities that life throws us, which it inevitably does, and turn into the storm of those adversities and find purpose and meaning, and use actually purpose and meaning to drive us forward to do extraordinary things. And so No Barriers provides these transformative experiences, and they can take the shape of still retreats and trips, but now we do curriculum in schools and we do all different kinds of experiences in quotes, to try to help people who are craving a life of purpose and meaning, maybe struggling with some big adversity, and navigate that pathway forward.
The first time that, I think the first time, might have been the second time, I went to Africa. I went there to make a documentary about a gal named Rebecca Dufek, who lives in Seattle, and she has neurofibromatosis type 2. So most people are familiar with NF1, which is the idea of having, I think it's commonly called elephant man's disease. You have these growths and tumors on the outside of your dermis. Well, type 2 is similar, but the tumors occur on the fascia of the brain and put pressure on the brain. So at the time, she might have had, I think, maybe 30 or 40 tumors on the inside of her skull pressing on her brain. And to bring attention to this, she decided she wanted to climb Mount Kilimanjaro.
Wow.
And so all of that wrapped into the story of going to Africa and seeing the people and the conditions and just the exposure to the culture of Africa under the storyline of this woman who had vibrating vision all day, and we were concerned about hypoxia with her, and there was all kinds of balance issues, and she was also deaf, and her husband at the time went with us, and they had 4 or 5 sponsors that went with us, including some medical professionals, were people that worked out with her. She worked out at Gold's Gym every day, and that was probably my first wake-up call to the kind of world you're in. Now, I don't do it on a daily basis. I just did it for that couple of weeks. But I could see how you could go and drop everything and go, I'm going to do this for the rest of my life. Mm-hmm. Because the gratifying experience of not just this woman, but of all of the people on the trip and the kids that you met along the way and the African kids, and I could see why you could be compassionate about this really fast. So tell me about kind of that part of your heart. Like when you, it's easy to intellectualize this. Go, hey, this is what we do. But let's get to the why and how it makes you feel and the humanity you see along the way.
Yeah. Well, first thing that came to mind as you were telling that story in answer to your question was that one of the very first expeditions that we worked on together with Eric Weimeyer was this program that we took a group of kids to Machu Picchu on a backcountry 7-day hike. And it combined kids who were blind with kids who were sighted. And like all of our expeditionary programs, it's not just about this one-time experience. You meet 6 months ahead of time and you go through curriculum, you go on the program, and it spurs on something else and we stick with you beyond. But anyway, so here we are in the middle of nowhere in the highlands of Peru, not at Machu Picchu, but 3 days out in some of these very small villages. And there's this guy named Clayton. Clayton was blind. He grew up in Virginia, and his parents were afraid to let him walk from their house to the mailbox out front, which was about 25 yards. And yet his teacher had convinced them that, please let him go on this trip. We need Clayton on this trip, And so we're in this small community, and there's this giant field.
Peru's a long ways from his mailbox.
He was a long way from his mailbox. So there's this giant field in this small community in the highlands of Peru up at 12, 13,000 feet. We get to this field, and Clayton, he's completely blind. So to lead a blind person, you're usually, sometimes you're doing a guided assist where they have their hand on your shoulder. Sometimes they're using their cane. And so we get to this field, and Clayton can tell from the sound that the world has kind of opened up from these narrow canyons we've been in. And he says, "Can I run?" And it's like an uneven field, but there's no cliffs. And we said, "Sure, if you want to run, you can run." And so Clayton, without any guide, just takes off running through this giant field. And stumbles a few times, gets up and runs. And at the end of it, we're all running alongside of him, and we're all laughing. And Clayton, he finishes this experience, and he says, "For the first time in my entire life, I felt free free to just do what I wanted to do, not held back by anything. And I would say there are moments like these on every program we lead, where people are having this profound experience that forever they'll point to as that was one of my top moments in my life that changed my perspective. And it's those moments that fuel me, right? Every time you see that light go off in someone's heart and soul, or see them break down in tears and share something that they've never shared before, that makes me get up the next day and want to do it again.
Well, and there's no, literally no barrier on who that affects. Like, I can retell my stories like that, and I look back at my life. It's always those types of moments that have the most profound effect on you. Is the trip outside your existing safety to a place that's maybe not as safe or a little unknown to you,
Mm-hmm.
and the finding the common thing or the sublime thing that really takes over for you. And those are the things that change you. It's not like, oh, I went to see a concert with so-and-so, or I went to someone's 3-day seminar. Yeah. Those are fine, but it's truly these little small moments that are majorly impactful. And for some people, they involve wildlife, or they involve animals, or even contact with another culture, cross-cultural. What have been some poignant ones for you where you felt, oh, this is changing David?
Well, there was one program that we started about 10 years in. It was actually on the 10th anniversary of Eric's Everest climb. We started a program for veterans. We'd never worked with vets before. To be honest, I was kind of intimidated by it, not having grown up. I had grandparents who were veterans, but I didn't grow up close to the military. I didn't grow up in a military family. There's a lot of issues that vets are having that are really intense. And I was a little bit worried that we could handle it. We'd handle a lot of intense issues, but some of these just felt different. And so we started a program that takes teams of disabled veterans out in the backcountry on these epic climbs. And it's usually teams of 12 to 15. I remember one of our first programs, this guy, the team was trying to climb a peak in Wyoming. Gannett Peak is the name of it. And, they train, again, months of training, getting together as a team, building a rope team. These vets, just for a little bit of background, most of the vets who come into our program love being in the military. It was their family. And for many people, it was their way out of a tough life prior to that. Not always, but a lot of times it was. And so they finally developed this family, this camaraderie, this sense of purpose and meaning that they have in the military. And then they have an injury and they're sort of ejected out and they feel helpless. And most of the vets who come to us have been through all the psychiatric treatments and all the drugs. And a lot of them have had addiction problems, suicide attempts. And sometimes they're coming to us as a last hope because a friend of a friend said, you got to try this thing. And so anyway, this group, they're planning to go up this peak, and it takes about a week to get up. And
right,
we get up high into the mountains after months of training and planning. And it had been warm, and the glacier that was towards the top had shifted a bit, and felt to our team leaders who were experts in this unstable and unsafe to cross. And so here we have this team that's planned for months. This is meant to be the thing that's going to get them through whatever they're dealing with, right? And for a lot of vets, the mission matters. I got to get to the top, right? I'm a mission-driven individual. Like, if I don't get to the top, this isn't success. So anyway, they get to this glacier, and we realize we're not going to make it. We just can't. Like, the conditions aren't going to allow for it. And so it's a bit of a devastating moment. But then this veteran named Paul, he goes and he grabs a rock that's beside this crevasse, and he says, "You know what? What I realize is I've been carrying a lot of weight in my proverbial rucksack of life. And some of this stuff I'm finally willing to let go of. And I need to take that rock and drop it into this crevasse and leave it here forever." And so, he did this, and then other vets did it. And I guess going back to your question about me, one of the profound things that I realized in that moment too was that I was carrying a lot of my own personal stuff. It didn't feel as maybe weighty as some of the things the vets were dealing with. But as you go through these experiences alongside a group like this, you realize that we all have shit that we're dealing with, and the ability to say it in front of someone and release it and put it out there in a trusted circle is something that I've tried to recreate now in my life. Like, how do you create that cycle, that circle of, we call it the rope team, the circle of trust and camaraderie, where you feel you can be completely vulnerable with the people around you. And I think that just helps you get through the toughest times and enjoy the great times with those same people.
You know, this has come up a couple of times on this cast, and it's kind of interesting that people often go, well, my thing isn't as big as their thing. They overcame this huge thing. And you diminish your own, or you might even diminish somebody else's, and you got to realize that, you know, if you take that gallon jug of water and you hold it here, you can hold it a fairly long time. But if you hold it out after 5 minutes, after 10 minutes, it's heavy. And everybody has their version of that thing, whatever it is for them. And nobody's is actually lighter than anybody else's. It's your perception of its lightness, because to the person who's carrying it, it's heavy. And I think that's a really wise insight for you to
it's really
appreciate.
For our community, that's a foundational sort of principle and part of what makes it magical when you come together, because you know that what No Barrier stands for is this idea that all of us have adversity in our lives. And there's profound things to learn in adversity. You need to share adversity with each other. And so when you come into a community that already believes in that, what you start to realize is that you can trust folks to share their own adversity. Just like you said, I didn't feel like mine was as weighty as the vets. And yet what we've tried to do is create this community where you never feel that your adversity isn't as load bearing as the next person, right? And just like you said, it's really how we all carry this. And
do you know Dave Vavora?
I don't.
Okay, I'm going to introduce you to this guy. This guy is an amazing dude. He's a ex military service member. He's an ex NFL football player, and he runs a center out of Dallas called the Adaptive Training Center. And the majority of people, it's a gym and training program that people go through weeks, and then some stay on for a long time. But it's generally people that are veterans that have been wounded, and their wounds may have been obtained in battle. But I've met people there that are missing limbs from motorcycle accidents and a variety of things. But they've gone through an immediate trauma relative to in time, and are in their training. Like I went up there for a class, and there's probably 35 people in the class, and I felt embarrassed for even saying a word in the room, because I have all four limbs, and you know, I'm fat, but I'm able, and you know, these people are monstrous athletes in what they're doing. And there were people that had just lost their ability to walk 6 weeks ago, and were designated as being in a wheelchair for the rest of our life, or whatever. And they're like, I don't know if I'm going to be here 10 more minutes, or this is going to be the rest of my life, or I'm going to get up and walk someday, but I'm going to act as if. And they're encouraging each other. And I think this would be a good connection for you and for him and for his people. I think that you have so much overlap, and you could bring so much value to that community, and they would as well for you, that I'll make that connection happen.
Wonderful. Yeah, I look forward to meeting them.
So give talk about your educational and training programs and what it takes to get into one, and give a couple flavors of what they are, so that the person listening here gets how they could, say, even through our Intellihelp extension, get involved with No Barriers.
Yeah. Well, over the 20 years we've been working on this in this space, we've developed a framework for how to teach people to embrace the challenges they face, to look at them as opportunity, to have hope and optimism in the face of great challenge. So anyway, we've got a set of principles that we teach in a way that we teach it that's very experiential. And so what I would say, first of all, is that it's not a bunch of book learning. It's very heart-centered, soul-centered, searching kind of work, but with tools and principles that help you kind of dive into that space alongside others. So if you are someone in one of the specific population groups, like a veteran group, we have everything from come to a retreat for 3 days at our mountain campus here in Colorado, to join us on a multi-week expedition, to do our month-long at-home program, which is really driven by Zoom meetings and kits that you get in the mail. So
let's talk about that. Let's dive into that one for a minute, because that's very accessible to everyone. And as you know me, like, you're going to talk about the features because you're doing it, and I'm going to want you to talk about the benefits. So let's back up and dive into that and tell me if I go to this, if I join this program, and it's extremely affordable, by the way, like crazy affordable. What are the benefits that are come to me in the first month or two, and then let's talk about the features that get us there.
Okay, yeah. Well, I think the first benefit that we see is that people develop a really keen sense of their purpose and vision that drives them. So that's a big one, is like, I'm going to find a purpose and vision that drives me, and I'm going to be able to say it. And every time I say it, it's going to give me energy to go forward.
I think that's really lacking in the world. I'm sorry to cut you off, but I'm going to hit on all of these because this is super important work you're doing. So there's a zillion people in the world that feel purposeless and don't even know that that's accessible to have a purpose. And to go through that process and go, oh, I can find a purpose that isn't, like we talked about at the top, some selfish thing, but actually is a benefit to the world, where I'll be bringing value, and people will want to engage with me with value, is huge.
Yeah, so true. We know that people, we like, I was lucky. I was born into this like desire to help change the world, but a lot of people we work with, they have no idea, but they know that they like it. They're like, where do I start? And so that's a big one. Another one that we see people struggle with that you get out of this program is, how do I start? What's my first step, right? So you have this grand vision now, and you got a purpose that's energizing you. Where the heck do I begin? And that first step is so difficult sometimes to identify and takes a lot of courage. And so how do you create a map of steps that get you towards that life purpose?
So that idea, I count. I matter in the world. No matter who you are, you matter. And that there is, I had this conversation with some of my students sometimes, and I'll ask them, I'll say, what do you think God wants you to do with your life? And they're like, well, I don't know. And they start to give answers. And I'm like, well, first of all, you got to realize he doesn't need your help. This is all going to happen with you or without you. But if you engage, if you step forward and say, hey, I'd like to help, I'd like to have a purpose, suddenly your sails will be filled with wind, and you will be going someplace that you weren't going yesterday, just by the willingness to step forward and say, okay, I want to move forward. I want to have a purposeful life. And that recognition right there is something anybody can access right now, and then line up with you and say, okay, I don't even know what this means, but this is how I feel. What do you say to that person? Go, okay, it's day one. Welcome to No Barriers.
And I don't know what my vision means, or I don't know what
I don't know what it is. I just know that I want to have one.
Yeah.
What you just said sounds good. I want to sign up for that. What does that mean for me?
Yeah. Well, what it means in day one is that your first week to month of work is going to be a series of activities done on your own or in groups to help define what it is that fuels the light inside of you. You're going to tap into this light that we all have, that you talk about, like some people describe it as God and connecting with God. We're going to get you a pathway to that light. And once you identify it and put it down on paper, that's going to be your fuel. And that usually takes it can take a week for some people, it can take a month or two for some people,
Sure.
but we'll lead you through that process together. And a lot of what you need is you need to hear other people who are going through that same process, because being alongside of others in that journey helps spark things for you. And what we often say is, hey, if you're on that side of like, hey, this is taking months and I don't know where we're going, we usually say, all right, well, let's start with just stretching yourself in a place that feels like there's positive energy, and let's try something. And we get you going in that direction.
Okay, so now what are the next steps in the program?
Yeah. Well, a big one that we see people struggle with is, you've got, okay, I've got a vague idea. I'm starting to hone in on what this purpose and vision is. I know what steps I'm going to take. Well, then you try some stuff and it doesn't go as well as you think, or the busyness and the crap of life hits you hard. And so there's this principle that we see in great leaders who go through adversity, which is we call alchemy, which is the process of turning lead into gold. And so how do you work your mindset so that even when the bad stuff happens, you can approach each day with hope and optimism and a belief in a future that doesn't yet exist? So this is a really important skill that we teach everyone, because we know even if you've got your vision and your pathway forward, it's not going to go the way you think. And there are going to be some really tough things that happen. So how do you shift your mindset to deal with those tough things?
Yeah, the great John Lennon quote was, "Life is what happens while we're busy making other plans." The reveal of how it actually turns out is always different, and I think learning to be adaptive and flexible, and learning that you can be adaptive and flexible, is important, and that's a life skill. So in this process, that happens.
Yeah, well, and one of my favorite books, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, who was a Holocaust survivor, talks about this idea that there's a space between stimulus and the response that we choose, and that we all have a choice no matter what that external stimulus is. And in the case, we often talk about a very negative external stimulus, unexpected, you have a space to choose how you want to respond to that. And often we forget that, right? Like we will go right to the response that's negative and down. And how could this have happened to me? And how is this going to change my life forever? And you actually have a choice in that space. And that's something you see from these extraordinary folks who've gone through adversity, is that at some point they realize they have that choice and they choose to attack the adversity, they choose to take it on with positivity. And there really is a conscious decision that you make.
So I kind of pulled you into this rabbit hole of the online experience and the rapid program. You have other programs. We can talk about those if you'd like. And talk a little bit of, if you don't mind, about the mix of folks that people meet inside an event or a program or a trip or whatever they do. Because I think that just the exposure to other people is a huge element of this.
Yeah, well, I think that there's a lot of talk in the corporate space now around diversity, equity, inclusion. And I think we've never called ourselves that, but what I would say that's really special about No Barriers with any event, in person or virtual, that you come into, is the diversity of people that are a part of it, right? We attract anyone who feels this sense of a desire for purpose and is struggling. And that's a lot of people, right? And so when you come into a program with us, let's say you enroll in, say, one of our corporate leader programs, well, there's going to be folks in there from all different walks of life, not just like the business community, small business, big businesses, but there's going to be people who are struggling with physical disability. There's going to be people who are that are veterans, who are caregivers for most of their time during the day. So what you end up is an exposure to a really diverse group of folks with different perspectives, because they've lived a very different experience, whether they've grown up in cities or in rural communities. We are very still US centric, but are growing a global community as well. So it's a pretty neat community that you get welcomed into, and it's a very warm community that people stay in touch with. Many of the people who go through our programs become friends for life. They still talk, the kid I was talking about, Clayton, from that hiking group, that was, almost 15 years ago. And those kids on that trip are all still friends. They have families and they're doing all these other things, but a bunch of those kids form a really tight bond. And we see that with our veterans groups. We see that with our core online courses, is that when you're going through this journey and being honest with others about your struggle, it forms bonds and connections that last.
Well, speaking to that, and it doesn't have to be Clayton, but I'm sure that you have some, I'll say, after stories of people that have had this experience and come back and 5 years, 10 years, 15 years later, relay, hey, this was life-changing for me. Is there one that comes to mind that you can share with us?
Yeah, there's a veteran named Carrie Ann, and she came to us at a time in her life where she'd been through all the different treatments and things were just not adding up for her. She was ready to give up. She was ready to give up on life. And she was actually from Texas, and she was going through a lot of different struggles through the trauma that she'd experienced and the injuries she'd experienced. And she decided from a friend reference to go on one of our veteran programs and had this very transformative, empowering experience. And one of the activities we do at the end of our programs is after you've gone through our curriculum, and you see this flag on my wall here, you have this no barriers flag, and on it you put this new vision you have for yourself. And a lot of times it's pictures or words. And Carrie Ann said that I want to live a life of peace and strength in the mountains. Now, this was very far from the life she was living now. And this happened years back. She called us this summer, and she had since moved to Colorado from Texas. She'd gotten out of a bad relationship. She regained control of her life, became a teacher and a counselor, and she had she lived in this home up in the mountains. Well, the home was, you guys probably heard about all the fires coming through Colorado.
Oh, yeah.
So she called to tell us, we actually checked in to see if her house was in the line of fire. It was pretty close to one of these fires. And she called to say, I want you to know I'm being evacuated. And I was getting in my car to leave with the few possessions I could take with me because it's a rapid evacuation. And I forgot my flag. And I ran into my house because I needed that flag. It sits above my bed and it reminds me that you changed my life and I will never be the same because of it. And she needed that flag as that physical reminder. So that's just one of those stories that sits with you and it's like, holy crap, that was years ago. And she'll say in her own words, you literally saved my life. I don't think I'd be on this planet if you didn't exist.
Wow. That's terrific. Well, there's something in the midst of those, particularly in the female veteran story, that most people are unaware of is because the way women are classified in the military, a lot of women that served in Iraq and Afghanistan were not registered as female combatants. They're not, even though they were in the theater of war and could be in an armored vehicle next to a man, if there was a conflict or an accident or an injury, they are not generally classified the same as men, and they do not get the same treatment and the same finance and the same help once their tour is over. And they come back, and these are our daughters and our sisters that are coming back and not represented. And like, I don't think that anybody in the last 15 years is thrilled with the VA, and no one's calling that a miracle cure program to begin with.
Right.
And to realize that there's this whole segment of people that served our country that are still being treated as second-class citizens, and it's overlooked.
So true.
And as women, they particularly if they get wounded, they often end up alone, and there's all these emotions around that about how they feel and their self-esteem about this. And it's a huge problem in this country, and it's a huge problem that nobody talks about. And it's something that we will be moving forward talking about on this cast. And we have actually in the Austin area, there is a program it's a retreat facility where women can go for a period of time, and I can't remember if it's 6 weeks or 8 weeks, and experience the other women that have been in this situation and trade and release that stress and release those stories and really start to get some networking help and the physical and psychological and all of the help that folks need through that. But I'm glad that was one of the stories that stood out to you, because I think, again, and I don't mean to jump on that time on your time, but it's such an important thing for us as a country and such an important thing that we're overlooking. So I appreciate that you guys do that and that you're doing something about that.
Yeah. Well, I think the the challenges that our veterans face upon return and reentry are significant, and nobody has all the right answers, but certainly they deserve a lot of energy and effort given the sacrifices they've made in their lives.
Well, and most of us, if we went on an international trip, we'd be talking about it forever. If we went on an international trip for 6 months and there was a whole litany of traumatic and stressful events that happened on that trip, you'd never hear the end of it from a civilian. But you don't hear the beginning of it often from a veteran. They just bottle it. They just bottle it up. And if it was you or me, we'd be blathering about it all the time. And that's and thinking that underneath it, they're somehow different human beings than us. They're not. They're just people people that went through really traumatic events. And we got to take care of these folks. And the tremendous amount of investment they've made in us and our freedoms and our liberties, we have to find a way to honor that and return that.
Yes.
And that's a big deal to us. So back in the land of no barriers, tell me what the future looks like for you. And I want, you never know who's going to come across this cast because, I have some goofy friends as well. So there's people that may want to help. So I do want to give you the space and time to tell us how we can help and how people can get involved and join and make a difference in the future of No Barriers.
Great. Well, thank you for that. Yeah, well, you can always learn more about us on our website, nobarriersusa.org. Obviously, that's the standard answer. But, the things that we need, certainly, we always need funding and funding partners and creative ways to generate revenue. So if you're listening and you're someone who wants to contribute to that effort, we would welcome you to do so. You can always reach out to me directly or check out what we do online. Just by way of example, we have a program we do for caregivers, and we host these retreats and curriculum that they do. And this year we had funding to bring just over 100 caregivers through retreats, and we had 1,400 caregivers apply, qualified applicants apply. So, certainly there's a big need. We have the same thing happen with vets where we have thousands apply and you can only send a few hundred. So there's a big need and a big gap in terms of that funding. And so I encourage you to look into that.
Let's talk about that because, rarely does the founder and the originator of a 501, of a nonprofit be able to say, hey, send me your money. I'm going to do this with your money. And there's so much suspicion about how people, that's one of the things that was really easy about Intellihelp is we actually are just facilitating the matcher, the giver, and the person in receiving. So it's super transparent. People are like, oh, and that's why we got involved with you is because we know, but let them know, like, okay, donate to No Barriers. This is how we deal with the money.
Yeah, great. Well, when you donate to us, 85% of it goes right into programs. 15% of it supports our ability to run the business and run, all the back end and raise funds and all of that. So you can know that the majority of your money by far is going right into programs. You can designate where you want it to go. You can say, I want to support a vet on a program, an expedition. I want to support a caregiver on the at-home program. I want to support a kid. You can go, and then that money goes to the place that you care the most about. So you can trust that we direct you. Like one of the things that I think I love about Intellihelp and why we're partnering with you all is that one-to-one relationship. And I'm always challenging my team to say, most of what we do is going right back to the people that we're serving. How can we make that connection all the more clear to people? Because when you give us $100, I want you to know that your $100 is helping Carrie Ann have that experience that she just had. It's literally helping her do that. That thing might cost us, $1,500 to do for her, but your $100 helps us get there. And so I'm always trying to let folks know that there's no shady back end here. We're not trying to build this huge infrastructure. I'd like to continue to devote more and more of that money to programs, but you can go online and pick the program that you want it to go to, and that's where it goes.
Yeah, I look at these, and that's one of the things that really attracted to you guys is because you look at this the same way that we look at it, is that we're like irrigation. Is we're the conduit that this stuff flows out through. We're not the keepers of it.
Yep.
We're just guiding it and getting it to the folks that need it, and we're the connective tissue and the pipeline from this to where you want to be, and you get to decide who's at the other end of that tap and the actual beneficiary, and you have some guidance over this. And
yeah, I'd also say if you've got listeners out there who run companies, we do a lot of work with companies big and small. And what we try to do with those companies is we try to really help them not only support the causes they care about, but to connect their employees to it through volunteerism, to create compelling stories, whether it's, feature commercials that we've run for like Wells Fargo, or stories that are more organic. I think a big part of what we are trying to do is to realize that all of us, whether we're individuals or working for a company, like we want to have impact, and there's a lot of different ways to have that impact. So certainly encourage you to be creative in your approach to us. We're a mid-sized nonprofit, but I think we still operate and think of ourselves as a small business that wants to help each individual. So that's the other thing that's really important for us, is that we're still about, yes, we serve tens of thousands of people, but every individual is what matters to us. I want everyone to have a story like Carrie Ann, or to have a story like Clayton, right? Like, so the power of No Barriers is the transformation of the one individual, despite the fact that we've grown and an ability to impact more.
So if a person could say, hey, I've got 5 employees and $10,000. I'd like to, can you put something together for us where we have an experience with you, donate that money, facilitates that, and something happens at the other end?
Yeah, for sure. Usually, like I'm doing one of these tomorrow, like there's a company that wanted to sponsor youth programs. We've got curriculum in schools, we've got retreats, and they wanted something for their employees too, because if you think about it, No Barriers is teaching people how to take on change and uncertainty. And that's a really good suite of things to teach our employees. And so we're actually hosting an hour-long get-together with employees. It's a training session and has some inspiration to it. And then their money is going to support scholarships for people to be in the program that they care the most about. And so we do these things, whether it's a series of programs for companies and their employees, and we try to connect those things to the thing that they care about on the giving side of the equation.
Well, we are honored to be affiliated with you, and really, really tickled by the work that you're doing, and looking forward to seeing us telling some stories together about how Intellihelp's audience plugged into No Barriers and got to have that experience. And we're thrilled to be, connected to you guys. And
yeah, we are as well. Yeah. Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk to your listeners and to partner with you all. We're looking forward to it.
Okay. Well, David Sherman, thank you for your time. I want to honor the time frame that I gave you, because I bet you've got busy things to do, and it got to the top of the hour really quick. That went by really fast. And I look forward to seeing you again personally.
Yeah, you as well.
Getting together. I'll be up in Colorado here in the next month or two, and so
Great.
I'll